As of today, November 18th, Far Cry 4 is 9 years old. I don't know if I should feel old or be in pure disbelief that a game that looks this good is 9 years old. Far Cry 4 is a special game to me, especially amongst the Far Cry series. This is my favorite Far Cry game, and I ranked it as so in that big ranking video I made a year or two back. I know that's not the most popular opinion, and everyone always praises Far Cry 3, and in terms of story, I definitely agree Far Cry 3 is better, and that game still has one of the most iconic cutscenes and lines in video game history. It's no question that Voss was an incredible villain, so it only figures Ubisoft would find a way to eventually bring him back to the series in some capacity. But because Far Cry 3 is so popular and constantly praised, I feel like Far Cry 4 has always lived in its shadow and often gets labeled as just a Far Cry 3 clone. And while yes, Far Cry 4 obviously shares similarities with Far Cry 3 in both gameplay and structure, in trying to replicate the presence of Voss with another large villain like Pagan, this game still has a lot about it that makes it distinct. And when you consider how many people loved Far Cry 3, it wouldn't make much sense to completely rework the formula in Far Cry 4. Now, by now it's definitely gotten stale. I mean, they still haven't switched things up much since Far Cry 3, but I always believed Far Cry 4 did what any good sequel or follow-up should do. Keep the core of what people loved about the previous games and make improvements elsewhere. And again, Far Cry 3 was a very well received game on its release. Now, Far Cry 4 came out in 2014. This was the first Far Cry game in a new generation, and 2014 was a massive year for Ubisoft. There were two Assassin's Creed games with Rogue and Unity, Far Cry 4, and Watch Dogs. That is a ridiculously stacked year for one publisher. And since these games were leading the new generation, they had significant upgrades when it came to graphics, specifically Far Cry 4 and Unity. AC Rogue was made for the previous generation, and Watch Dogs, while it looks fine, definitely doesn't look quite as visually impressive as Unity or Far Cry 4. I firmly believe both Unity and Far Cry 4 were games that were ahead of their time when it came to visuals. These games still look better than a lot of new releases coming out now, and it's so hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that this is now what 9-year-old games can look like. Far Cry 4 in terms of visual fidelity and detail is still really impressive, but I really think the main reason the game looks so good and why it holds up so well has to do with the setting and art style of the game. Without question, my favorite part about Far Cry 4, and a huge reason why it's my favorite Far Cry game, is the setting. It's in a fictional country named Kyrat in the Himalayas, and my goodness, it is still one of the most breathtaking open worlds I've ever laid my eyes upon. With the Himalayan mountains in the backdrop, it feels like you're stumbling upon a screenshot-worthy view every few seconds. Even though this game may not have the same level of technology or fidelity as Far Cry 6, I still think it's a generally better looking game, and it's not even close really. Which goes to show there's more that goes into a game's graphics and visuals than just fidelity or level of detail. There's no other Far Cry game in the series where I stop to take in the sights or take a screenshot as much as I do in Far Cry 4. Man, I had an entire album worth of screenshots that I wanted to use as a thumbnail for this video alone. Kyrat's atmosphere is just unmatched. And while the gameplay may not be too different from Far Cry 3, it still has that typical Far Cry chaotic fun, and a story that may not be as strong as 3's, but still has a lot of compelling elements. Mainly Pagan Min. Say what you will about Far Cry 4's story, and Ajay as a main character, and Amida and Sabal, but Pagan Min is a fantastic antagonist. I don't even really like using the term villain when it comes to Pagan, because he has a lot more depth than meets the eye, but I'd say it's pretty fair to say Pagan carries Far Cry 4's story. This is one of the few games where I find the antagonist more likable and empathetic than the main character and his allies. Obviously, a big reason why Pagan is so great is the performance by Troy Baker. Everybody knows Troy Baker. Joel from The Last of Us, Sam Drake in Uncharted, Joker in Arkham Origins, along with about a million other roles. One of the greatest voice actors of our time, and he brings an incredible sense of likability and charm to Pagan. You can't convince me that if Pagan is played by anyone else, that he'd be even close to as revered as he is by the Far Cry community. I know Far Cry has been able to land some big names to play their villains now, like Giancarlo Esposito, but I still firmly believe Michael Mando and Troy Baker have the two best performances in the series. Pagan also has an incredibly dark and tragic backstory, with his daughter being murdered by Ajay's father Mohan, and they explored his psyche and the trauma he went through from that experience in Far Cry 6's Pagan Control DLC. I still stand by that being a fantastic DLC as well. In fact, I loved all of those villain DLCs, but I felt that the DLC further clarified Pagan's backstory and why he acted the way he did towards Ajay in Far Cry 4. I still think Mohan Ghale was 100 times worse than Pagan, and I ultimately find Pagan to be the more empathetic and likable side of the conflict with the Golden Path. Amida and Sabal are both insufferable, and I think my biggest issue with the story is that Ajay just continues to serve them without any complaint like a trained dog. I honestly wish there was an option to side with Pagan over them, because it's a lose-lose no matter which of the two you choose. But anyways, the point is, even though Pagan may not be as iconic of a villain as Voss, he's still easily one of, if not the best in the series, and his character, along with this incredible setting and open world, are the main two reasons I love this game and still want to return to it and talk about it 9 years later. Again, it still feels really weird to acknowledge this is a 9-year-old game, and next year it'll be a full decade, but it certainly holds up a lot better than a vast majority of other games from 2014, and honestly, after revisiting it and talking about it again, it makes me want to replay the game in full. Maybe I'll make a full retrospective on it for its 10-year anniversary, but for now, I just wanted to revisit and talk about the game for its 9-year birthday. It feels like it's been a while since I've talked about a Far Cry game in general, but let me know down in the comments how you guys feel about Far Cry 4 and where it ranks amongst the rest of the series for you. Like I said, it's my personal favorite Far Cry game, and if you're curious in seeing my full ranking, I'll link my video ranking the games from a while back in the description below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and considered subscribing to the channel if you're new. And other than that, thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.